All right. Good morning, everyone, or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining us for our webinar today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is John Brandon. I'm Senior Director of International Relations Programs for the Asia Foundation in Washington, D.C. And I'm pleased to welcome you to this morning's webinar on the recent release of the Asia Foundation's report titled Deepening Ties, Prospects for Trilateral Cooperation between the Republic of Korea, the United States, and Vietnam. In December 2021, the Asia Foundation, in cooperation with the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, held the first ever trilateral dialogue to discuss political, security, economic, and trade issues important to the relationship between all three countries. Areas discussed included global dynamics, domestic determinants of foreign policy, and prospects for international cooperation in such areas as renewable energy, the digital economy, global health, amongst others. The report, if you look in the chat box, is available to you now. We have three excellent speakers who participated in this dialogue back almost 6 months ago, and one from South Korea, one from the United States, and our third participant from Vietnam. Let me briefly introduce them. Our first speaker will be Professor Kang Seon-ju. She is a professor at the Institute for Foreign Affairs and National Security at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Most of Professor Kang's research centers around the issues of global economic governance, development cooperation, and middle powers. She's been with the Institute for Foreign Affairs and National Security since 2007. Prior to that, she taught political science at the University of North Texas in the United States, and her academic research was published in the Korean Journal of International Studies, the European Journal of Political Research, the Journal of Politics, and the Journal of Peace Research. Our second speaker will be Adam Schwartz. Adam is the founder and chief executive officer of Asia Group Advisors, where he counsels senior executives on business opportunities in key Southeast Asian markets and how to effectively manage political, economic, and security risks. Prior to that, from 2001 to 2013, he worked for McKinsey & Company in Southeast Asia, serving the private sector, public sector, and state-owned enterprise clients in energy, telecom, agribusiness, and financial sectors. He's also an adjunct fellow at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore, where he lectures on political, economic, and security issues across Southeast Asia. I first met Adam many years ago when he was a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He received the Edward R. Murrow Fellowship there back in 1997, 1998. And he is the author of a book, well-respected book, A Nation in Waiting, about contemporary Indonesian history. Our third speaker will be Dr. Vo Tri Tran, who is the former Deputy Director General of the Vietnam Central Institute for Economic Management. He is currently a senior expert at the Central Institute for Economic Management. Dr. Vo mainly undertakes research and provides consultation on issues related to trade liberalization and international economic integration and macroeconomic policies. His other areas of interest include institutional reforms, the financial system, and economic development. I'm asking each of our speakers to speak for approximately 8 minutes, and then after they're done, we will welcome your questions. We'd like you to put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and then if you would also kindly identify yourself when posing these questions. So with that, thank you all for coming, and Professor Kang, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. It is my pleasure to participate in this event to release a report on trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the United States, and Vietnam. As you mentioned, it was 6 months ago that I was invited to speak for the first ever South Korea, United States, Vietnam Trilateral Seminar in December 2021. Okay. And it is more pleasurable to see the fruit of the seminar and discuss the prospects for further cooperation among the three countries. Since last December, things have changed in a dramatic manner, and there could not be more opportune time to discuss trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the United States, and Vietnam. As easily noticed in the report, most speakers in the previous seminar were optimistic back then about trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the United States, and Vietnam. The three countries were believed to have shared reasonable grounds to forge trilateral cooperation. Now, 6 months later, the three countries seem to have compelling reasons to carry their cooperation potential into action, given the political and economic whirlwind blowing in and out of the region. The three countries would find that their trilateral cooperation is a stabilizing force rather than divisive one in the region, whether they cooperate for economy or security. One of the compelling reasons for South Korea, the United States, and Vietnam to go ahead with the trilateral cooperation is the official launch of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework in May. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is led by the United States and has many functions and facets, many of which South Korea and Vietnam share. Both South Korea and Vietnam are eagerly in for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, along with 11 other Indo-Pacific countries. The significance of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for South Korea, the United States, and Vietnam is that it sets a stage for the three countries to cooperate in a systematic manner. First, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework indicates the United States' willingness to re-engage economically with the countries in the Indo-Pacific. When President Trump pulled the United States out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, in 2017, the United States lost systematic mechanisms to engage in the Indo-Pacific region. With the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the United States regains the tools with which to engage systematically in the regional economy. Second, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework tones down the competitive nature of United States Indo-Pacific strategy with Indo-Pacific strategy. United States Indo-Pacific strategy is largely driven by geopolitics and competition with China. The Biden administration has been working with allies and partners to modernize defense capabilities in the Indo-Pacific in order to counter the rise of China. On the other hand, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework serves to soften the military orientation of the United States Indo-Pacific strategy. While countries in the Indo-Pacific, including South Korea and Vietnam, do not wish to be caught in the middle between the United States and China, the absence of the United States from the region would be equally undesirable. Thus, the presence of the United States in the region is welcome, and soft but steady presence of the United States is more welcome. Then, how would the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework affect trilateral cooperation between the United States and between South Korea, the United States, and Vietnam? The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework consists of 4 pillars: economic connectivity, economic resilience, clean economy, and fair economy. Each pillar of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework has smaller themes such as digital and emerging technologies, labor, agriculture, trade facilitation, supply chain resilience, infrastructure and clean energy, and tax and anti-corruption. As the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework stands now, it is designed to meet the state of economy that the three countries face respectively. The United States is concerned about supply chains resilience from national security perspectives. The Biden administration seeks to reduce the threats to national security from disruption and overdependence on Chinese supply chains. The United States endeavors to secure both its economy and national defense by building with reliable partners supply chains for products and raw materials essential to national security. South Korea and Vietnam can play a role in the supply chains that the United States wishes to build. Particularly in two areas of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the three countries can achieve a higher partnership and cooperation. They are digital supply chains and infrastructure. On the other hand, South Korea and Vietnam will benefit from taking part in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework as they have access to United States advanced technology in digital transformation and clean energy solutions. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework has just got off with the ground and will go through changes and negotiations to take shape further. Nevertheless, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is not likely to develop into a free trade agreement for the region because the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework does not negotiate tariff reductions but seek more regulatory harmonization. In that regard, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is not likely to interest or help all the countries in the region. Instead, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework will advance cooperation with the allies and partner countries, particularly on critical and strategic sectors and technologies. Those selected countries include potentially South Korea and Vietnam from the U.S. point of view. The Indo-Pacific agreements, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is likely to provide foundations for unilateral agreement between South Korea, States, and Vietnam. The components of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework are in line with what the three countries would cooperate without the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Thus, the three countries who have converging economic and security interests over the Indo-Pacific region would be able to strengthen their partnership under the aegis of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So, given that dynamic changes in the international relations in the region, and the huge task for economic transformation for the 21st century, I think if these three countries, if they can, and if they are eager to utilize the opportunities provided under the or within the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, these countries, trilateral cooperation for these three countries have a relatively bright future, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kang. We'll now have Dr. Vo Tri Tran speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? So basically, I have 3 points. As in the previous seminar, I already mentioned about the solid foundation for the 3 country cooperation, right? We are very important partners, comprehensive strategic partners. We have a wide range of and deep economic relations, trade, investment, tourism, and many others. And we also are members or involved or engaged very deeply in many international arrangements, especially in the region, right? And we would like to, utilize our cooperation for the global and regional peace and prosperity and stability. So I think that we already talked about many areas we can have cooperation, right? But since then, over the last basically 6 months, we can observe 2 new developments. So that's my about the second point. Geopolitics, right? Change dramatically, right? Especially if you look at the war between the Ukraine and Russia. So I think we need to think more about how our economy become more resilient to any kind of shock, right? So in that sense, I think we can have many cooperation, right? Macroeconomic stability, structure of the economy, and some area we need to focus on. We already talked about after the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Medical equipment, supply, food security, energy security, all kind of that. And even we can have cooperation how we can develop a good social security, right? Kind of network, for the people. So that's my second point. And the third point, we already heard that's about it, right? Korea, Vietnam, and initiator US about the IPAC, right? Yeah, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. What I think about that framework, the first one, there's also about the issues Vietnam would like to reform, to have, to develop. If you look forward for the Vietnam development over the next 10 years or even go beyond, right? We would like to continue institutional reform, so our institution become more transparent and more market oriented. We also have advantage in develop, new energy sector, rely more on the wind, solar, and many kind of others. And that's consistent because right now we have program of digital transformation, right, for Vietnam in all area, e-government, digital economy, digital society on the thing. That's right. So I think that's also the key pillars of the IPAC, right? But I would like to say IPAC is a process, and even as already mentioned that led by US, but I think we need to strengthen the role like a Vietnam and Korean cooperation between 3 countries, right? For discussion of the contents of the pillars of the IPAC, right? How we like to see that. And last 2 other for the IPAC. I think that's a process. So maybe we learn from the other international arrangements like APEC and many others. Maybe we need to have a kind of early harvest for the IPAC, right? So the members of the IPAC would like to see the good example, and then we can put forward. So some kind of pathfinders, early harvest, that's also, we think for the IPAC. And last but not least for the IPAC, right, in the context of interaction, many kind of institution in the region, right? And some country a member of one, some they are not a member of other arrangement. So, but whatever the case, together with the role, particularly US and other mid power, like Korea, Japan, Australia, and even Vietnam, to develop IPEF. I think we don't need to forget about the ASEAN centrality, right? Right, because in all dimension, ASEAN centrality very important. If you look at the security dimension, political dimension, and economic dimension for the cooperation in the region, and we need to remember even 7 members of ASEAN is a member of IPEF, not CNM, right? Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, but ASEAN centrality. That's always go together with ASEAN community. And one target of the ASEAN community is how not just about integration, about AEC or whatever, but also about how we can narrow development gap within the ASEAN. So with that, I think we can go forward. And whatever the case, I think Vietnam already have very good experience for the reform and for integration over the last more than 30 years, right? Even involved in high quality FTA and many others. So I think Vietnam always is very active and responsible for the IPEF. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vo. Adam, the virtual floor is yours.
John, thanks very much, and good morning to all, or good morning from my perspective to all the participants. So, as I was thinking about sort of our last time we got convened for this conversation, it was only 6 months ago, but it seems like in some ways an enormous amount has changed. As Dr. Tyne and Professor Kong have already enumerated, there's been a sort of a huge additional surge in kind of geopolitical issues, with the U.S.-China rivalry continuing to get ever more fragile. In my view, obviously the invasion of Ukraine and the disruptions to the supply chain, both energy and food. The COVID situation is quite different and sort of in a largely in a good way. In most countries, that it has gotten a little bit better. IPEF, of course, which both of my colleagues have already discussed, and I'll at the end of my remarks. So there's sort of a very, in such a short period of time, quite a different feel of the region and of the issues, and of, I would say, there's sort of an increase, a net increase in kind of fragility and feeling across the region because of those issues. On the other hand, a lot has not changed. From the U.S. point of view, the Asia region is still considered to be the most important, both in an economic and a sort of a future security sense. When it comes to Korea and Vietnam, these are, again, what has not changed. These are both seen as to be very key allies of the United States and very important partners, again, across a variety of sectors. Vietnam is sort of continuing with its economic reforms, like all countries has been sort of sidetracked to a certain extent by COVID. But it continues to push forward in its trade relations, and including with the U.S., with which it is now in Vietnam is now the 7th largest supply of imports to the United States. It's pushing a number of incentives to attract high value added industries in its investment. It has signed a bilateral trade agreement with the U.S., and pre-COVID, bilateral trade between the two countries had reached over $70 billion. It is a signatory of RCEP, of CPTPP, a preferential trade agreement with the EU, and of course, most recently with IPEF. Korea, of course, is also a very, very one of the most important partners to the United States in Asia. It is one of the most export-dependent countries in the world. It is an enormous contributor to global R&D, second only to Germany in sort of R&D spend per capita. It's the seventh largest trade partner to the U.S. And while it has affected by COVID in an economic sense, it is rebounding quickly. The U.S. and the Korea and Vietnam have pursued a number of are continuing to pursue a number of trilateral cooperation initiatives across a variety of areas, from COVID to COVID recovery to climate change, education, digital frameworks, smart cities, et cetera. There are a number of initiatives that are underway. I'll get back to IPEF a little bit later, but prior to IPEF, the United States had launched its Build Back Better World, B3W, with the goal to mobilize private sector capital, in part to provide an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. In late last year, just before we spoke last time, the White House had announced its plans to invest in 5 to 10 large infrastructure projects throughout the course of 2022. Vietnam has been a prime driver of a number of important ASEAN-led initiatives that lend themselves to both bilateral cooperation with the United States, as well as trilateral cooperation with the United States and Korea. One of them is the Master Plan for Connectivity, which has a goal of enhancing ASEAN integration through sustainable infrastructure, digital innovation, and people mobility, sort of building on or trying to push ahead on to support the ASEAN economic community, as well as the U.S. ASEAN Smart Cities Partnership, which has its goal to harness U.S. public and private sector expertise to collaborate with 26 participating ASEAN cities on smart city development. From the perspective of Korea, which the U.S. is very supportive of, is overall its new Southern policy, which is looking to diversify Korea's economic relations across ASEAN and enhancing cooperation both with ASEAN and India, and the relationship, particularly with Vietnam, has been a priority within that. There are a number of areas, just in the spirit of sort of being concise here, lend themselves to additional collaboration across the three countries. Focus on Vietnam to a certain extent because it is a priority issue for the U.S. and Korea to enhance their assistance and their collaboration with respect to Vietnam. And I think one way of trying to identify areas where that aid can be used most effectively, or that assistance can be used most effectively, is looking at some of the areas in which Vietnam itself has identified as sort of focus areas for it to improve its productivity and sustain economic growth. I'll mention four. One is the ease of doing business. Vietnam, though it has made good progress in recent years, ranks still 70th in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index, or at least it had in the previous edition. And what's holding it back is a number of issues, from regulation, IP, sanctity of intellectual property protection, a shortage of skilled labor, and a number of contract sanctity issues. Two is a pace of innovation. The manufacturing sector, while having grown largely over the last 2 decades, is still marked by low innovation in many sectors. And given Vietnam's goal to sort of try to accelerate its pursuit of a high-tech, high-value-add manufacturing sector, the productivity and innovation concerns are meaningful. And the need for sort of more tertiary level and technical engineering institutes and schools. Three, trade frictions, particularly with the U.S. the U.S. has over recent years alleged a number of violations of trade rules, from currency manipulation to timber practices to transshipment issues, and other forms of protectionism. And four would be labor shortages just more generally, and this is really more an issue for kind of supply chain resilience. So with those four in mind, that they lend themselves to a number of areas where U.S., Korea, and Vietnam can expand their cooperation. On the business environment, there have already been a number of developments. There's a Korea University opened, I guess about 18 months ago in Da Nang. USAID has expanded its support for education and tertiary education. The DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, has offered support to the Fulbright University late last year, and there are a number of other initiatives in that educational space. On trade, again, the U.S. and Vietnam have worked largely through the convening power of USAID on improving post-clearance audits to sort of minimize the risk of transshipment violations. And there's a number of tools now being put in place to support Vietnam to analyze infrastructure projects through the red dot, or sorry, the blue dot network, and the Mekong Safeguards programs, which USAID Vietnam launched last year. So in terms of a few words just finally on IPEF, which is obviously the latest initiative and the one that's gotten the most attention in recent weeks. I don't have a great deal to add to what Dr. Tyne and Professor Kong have already announced. I think from the U.S. perspective, it is recognized that the IPEF is the start of a process, not the end of it. I think there is a recognition on all parties that there are certain constraints domestically in the United States, politically, on moving, frankly, in the area that almost all of the United States' partners in Asia wanted to move in, which is something closer to a re-engagement with CPTPP or whatever a subsequent arrangement of that might be, or to move IPEF in the direction of something that's a little bit more clearly thought of or seen as a trade agreement. There is a recognition that the partners and the signatories to IPEF do not want IPEF to be requiring choices between the U.S. and China. But of course, there's also domestic politics in the U.S., which wants IPEF to be going in precisely that direction. So those are issues that are going to have to be worked out through the negotiating process as IPEF unfolds. I was traveling across Southeast Asia through much of April and May, just prior to the launch of IPEF, and in general, the feedback or the comments that I heard on it were, again, quite consistent with what my fellow panelists have mentioned, which is that it's better than nothing. To the extent that it keeps momentum going on engaging the U.S. in an economic sense in the region and building out an economic pillar of its broader Indo-Pacific strategy, then this is a positive step. But that there is a good deal of somewhere between frustration and anxiety about whether there is domestic political support in the U.S. for pushing the IPEF, frankly, further in the direction of which the United States' Asian partners would like to see it go. And of course, we can dig into the details across the four pillars of IPEF if there's interest in time on the call. But John, let me pause there and make sure we leave enough time for questions.
Thank you very much, Adam. For those who are joining us, if you'd like to pose a question, if you would use the the question and answer box, that would be appreciated. Let me pose some questions while we wait for some to come from our audience. To Professor Kang, 6 months ago, President Yoon was not president. He was running for office, but he's only been in office a brief period of time. But he's laid out something called an ABC strategy towards Southeast Asia: advance human capital, build health security, connect cultures, and digitize Asian infrastructure. I was wondering, do you think this will be similar to President Moon's Southern policy, or are there any? Do you think there might be any major differences, or does it seem to be something the same and it's just different wording?
Oh, thank you for the question. Actually, the President Yoon has been in office only for a month, and his foreign policy is still shaping. So even though he mentioned the ABCD strategy toward Southeast Asia, it still needs more time and work to be precisely presented toward the Korean public and the world, I guess. But per your question, whether there's any similarities between President Yoon and President Moon's, his predecessor, President Moon's foreign policy towards Southeast Asia, I would say that President Yoon's ABCD strategy will have both the similarities and similarities to and dissimilarities from President Moon's new Southern policy. It is reasonable to believe that the ABCD strategy of President Yoon will be similar to those of President Moon's new Southern policy. Like the ABCD indicates the certain indicates a specific areas or the programs that South Korea will pursue with regard to Southeast Asia, and those things are not really about changing Korea's President Yoon's foreign policy towards Southeast Asia. So it is very reasonable to believe that the President Yoon's ABC strategy will have a certain components from President Moon's new Southern policy. However, I think there's a big difference between President Moon's new Southern policy and President Yoon's ABCD strategy toward Southeast Asia. That is the context that these two presidents put Southeast Asia. Like President Moon's new Southern policy is only for Southeast Asia. So as the name says, new Southern policy, it is only targeted, the President Moon's new Southern policy only targeted the Southeast Asian neighbors. But President Yoon likes to see Southeast Asia in a broader context of Indo-Pacific. And President Yoon is thinking of making South Korea's own Indo-Pacific strategy after meeting with President Biden in May. So, if we say the President Moon focused only on the Southeast Asia new Southern policy, President Yoon will formulate foreign policy toward Southeast Asia within the context of South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy. I think that is the big change from President Moon from President Moon to President Yoon in terms of South Korea's foreign policy towards Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Collins. We have a question from Andrew Yo, who is a senior fellow and SK Korea Foundation chair at the Brookings Institution. His question is, much of the discussion has focused on economic cooperation and IPEF, which provides the most promise for trilateral cooperation. That said, what are the prospects for trilateral cooperation on strategic issues, such as addressing illegal fishing, weapons sales, or joint maritime exercises? He didn't specify who to address it to, so why don't I ask Dr. Vo if you could take a first crack at this, and then I'd invite all three speakers to make any remarks that they like.
Thank you. I am not the expert in security issues, but I think if we think about triangle cooperation, many dimensions, we can think of. One is, of course, that we recognize we have problem, right? In the sea, like South China Sea, we say East Sea, or the sea in surrounding the Korea Peninsula, even Japan. So in that sense, right? The cooperation, in the sense, we support the freedom navigation on the thing, and everything based on the international law, like UNCLOS, right? And somehow we can move forward from the DOC and to the COC, say, negotiation between ASEAN and China. So that's one thing. Another one, I have to say, Vietnam, we pursue the policy, not rely on one power to fight against another power. We not allowed our land to have military base by other country, and also many other kind, right? So but that does not mean we don't have any kind of military cooperation, say, with the US, Japan, and even Korea, right? And in reality, somehow we already have quite a good cooperation, right? Even in military field. Another thing, I think, as already mentioned, if we look at the case of ASEAN, there's ASEAN community, we have three pillars: economic community, security community, and social culture community, right? So in that sense, if we recognize, right, ASEAN can have, each member, they can have bilateral relations with other countries, but at the same time, we can strengthen the kind of security, right, community, ASEAN community. And by that, we can strengthen the ASEAN Centrality. And you know the role of Shangri-La, meeting in Shangri-La every year, right? MMDS plus or whatever. So that's my view, right? Even we focus on economic cooperation, that does not mean exclude our triangle cooperation in many other areas. And that's good for the region, that's good for peace, and for trade, for investment, for prosperity. That's my.
Thank you, Dr. Vo. Adam, would you like to add anything?
Just a few thoughts. I mean, it's a good question, and that Andrew posed. I think, I would maybe start by saying that from the perspective of many Asian partners of the United States, including South Korea and Vietnam, that actually a broader economic and a more ambitious economic policy or element may be the biggest thing missing in the strategically speaking, right? So in some senses, economics is strategy in this issue, just given the very rapid growth of economic relations between all Asian countries and China over the last 2 decades, both from a trade and investment point of view. That and as well as the variety of economic trade agreements that have been signed from RCEP to CPTPP to a variety of sub-regional arrangements. Well, almost all of which the United States is not a part of. So I think the kind of the current focus on trying to fill that gap may well be the most strategic thing the United States could do in its broader Indo-Pacific policy. I mean, there are, as Professor Kong and Dr. Tyne have mentioned, a number of things already happening, maybe not so much in a trilateral cooperation way, but in a more bilateral way. For example, the U.S.-Vietnam mill relationship, its defense cooperation has been growing, but at a very measured pace. I think I would say. I think my sense is that the U.S. would like it to go a little faster, and Vietnam is being quite cautious about how to progress there. But there is some training going on. There is some low-level exercises. There's another aircraft carrier visit this year. So there is some stuff happening there. There's been some conversation, as you know, John, about South Korea possibly joining the Quad or certain initiatives pushed by the Quad. I haven't, I don't think I haven't seen much that has gone to scale on the illegal and unreported fishing issue. But obviously on some other issues, like climate change being a big one, there's quite a lot happening in that conversation. John, the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry's office, has been very active, particularly with Vietnam, and both that office and the DFC sort of have prioritized Vietnam and Indonesia and India across Asia as sort of the priority target markets for kind of U.S. climate change collaboration and cooperation. So I think there is a number of things happening, but I wouldn't just finish where I started. I wouldn't necessarily dismiss the economic arena as non-strategic at this stage, given how the U.S. perceives its core strategic rival in Asia.
Thank you, Adam. Professor Kong, would you like to add anything?
Yes, actually, the strategic cooperation in the Pacific is a very tricky and difficult question for all the countries located there. But it is at the same time, it is hard to say that countries are truly cooperating if they omit cooperation in the strategic arena, strategic issues. So in one way or another, it will be necessary and desirable for countries in the Pacific, to cooperate on, the strategic issues with the United States. But given the, given the tense circumstances in the region, I think it doesn't have to be outright joint military exercises that Indo-Pacific countries can conduct with the United States. So for me, it's an alternative to joint military exercise with the United States in the name of freedom of navigation in South China Sea. I think countries can conduct maritime domain awareness, including or not including the United States. So if South Korea, Vietnam, and like Indonesia, Singapore, or if those countries can conduct that kind of the maritime exercises or maritime cooperation, I think they can be, good substitute for joint military exercises, including the United States. But and then even those the maritime domain awareness activities will send a strong enough signal to China. So I think it could be certain the substitute for outright joint military exercise, including the United States. Yes, but if this if the Indo-Pacific region is going to be stable without dominance dominance or cause and exercised by China, I think these the countries in the Indo-Pacific needs to show certain cooperation, the strategic cooperation, and that can be done with through the indirect or rather soft. It is hard. It is strange to use a term word soft, but less obvious, more civilian oriented. The exercise, Coast Guard exercise, something like that. I think that they will do some. They will do some good for the region and then for the China, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. At the end of Dr. Vo's remarks, he had talked about the importance of Asean Centrality, and that IPEF included 7 of the 10 members, but did not include 3. And they were Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, which are also the 3 most underdeveloped countries in the region. And I think he was talking about how to wanting to include them so as to preserve centrality and to sort of lift all boats, if I'm understanding you correctly, Dr. Vo. I was wondering, Adam, in your time going through Southeast Asia a couple of months ago, people talking about this, I mean, what appetite might there be to include these 3 countries someday? We should probably exclude Myanmar, just given the political turbulence there, but really more Laos and Cambodia.
And John, is that specifically to IPEF is the question?
To IPEF, yes.
Listen, I think from the U.S. point of view, it's current, or at least in the run up to the initial launch, I think the strategy was the more the merrier. I think there was a strong push by the Biden administration just to get as many countries to sign on as possible, and as a result, kind of the bar to get over to sign, dropped quite a bit in the last month or so. The signatories did not really commit to anything other than to begin a negotiation or a discussion across a framework that was broken up into these 4 pillars. Now, as you say, Myanmar was not one of the countries that was sort of sought after for inclusion, but the IPEF was sent to a large number of countries in the hope of trying to create a sense that this was an initiative that was sought after by as broad a number of countries as possible, representing the highest amount of global GDP as possible. So it's not my sense that there's any attempt to exclude. I just think certain countries weren't quite ready. It needed a fair bit of explanation. There was around, for example, around the U.S. ASEAN summit in Washington, D.C. in the second week of May, there was just a flurry of sideline meetings between senior members of the visiting delegations of the 9 countries that participated, not including Myanmar. Not on the sidelines of that summit, but talking to USTR and Commerce, and particularly trying to understand more clearly what what signing up to the IPEF meant and didn't mean. And I think there was a little bit just kind of a time constraint of how many meetings and how many countries could be engaged in ASEAN. I think at the end of the day, I think the U.S. was very happy to get 7 ASEAN signatories of the 10, which was quite a bit higher than it originally set out to do when it had a slightly higher bar for what signing up meant. But I think the short answer to your question, John, I don't think there's any specific pushback or resistance to others joining. Again, Myanmar accepted. It's just going to take a little while, I think, to explain what signing up means.
Okay, thank you. We have just a little bit of more time. I'm just going to ask you all a quick question. The report listed multiple areas where the 3 countries could cooperate: renewable energy, digital economy, global health, infrastructure, some others. If you had to just pick one area to start with, what would you be proud of?
Professor Adam already lists many areas for triangle.
But if you had to pick one in,
I just pick 2 or 3 more, right? One is logistics. That's very much related to the supply chain and how we can optimize the supply chain, whatever, and to be more resilient. That's a logistic one. Another one is a financial sector, right? Many new development, you can talk from startup, Bitcoin, or the new way the central bank can manage a supply, money supply, or everything. And even there's no secret, Vietnam would like to develop Ho Chi Minh City to be a financial center, so kind of that cooperation. So 2 other area I would like to mention, there's a logistic and a financial sector.
Thank you. Adam?
Well, listen, it's tough to take anything off the list, and I think the supply chain and logistics issue that Dr. Tan just mentioned is also a very important one, a very important priority for the U.S. administration. But I think if I were to single out one, I see an enormous amount of potential on the renewable energy front as an area for trilateral cooperation, and there's I think quite a bit more there, both in the policy environment that sort of enable that, as well as sort of financially underwriting, supporting various blended finance mechanisms to try to promote more and a faster replacement of hydrocarbons with renewables.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Kang, would you like to add anything?
Actually, my peak overlaps with Mr. Schwartz and Mr. Dr. Tan. I think these 3 countries can cooperate on digital supply chains and clean energy solutions for the sake of climate change. So I think 3 of us have similar views on how these 3 countries can proceed with cooperation in certain sectors. I think they are the one. Yeah.
Now, whatever the education on.
Yeah.
Whatever
the education should come with that kind of supply chain transformation or the clean energy solutions, I guess. Yeah.
Well, it's good that we have consensus on this, that all 3 countries can move on and cooperating in this area. I want to thank all of you for your very thoughtful remarks and response to our questions. When we were starting this program, I mean, it was striking to see that that Vietnam's 2nd and 3rd largest trading partners are South Korea and the United States, and just those 2 countries comprise almost 27% of global trade. Which, I mean, China is the largest trading partner, it's a half. But you've seen over the last several years deepening economic cooperation, as well as security cooperation in areas with some limits, as Adam was talking a little bit before. But there is certainly a great opportunity in the areas that were mentioned to, renewable energy, supply chain, other issues, to be able to cooperate further between the three countries, or perhaps with other within greater Asian regional architecture. So with that, let me thank you, Professor Kang, Adam, and Dr. Vo for your comments today in the audience. I thank you for your attendance this morning. So I hope you all have a good day or a good evening. Bye-bye now. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Very well. Thank you. Bye-bye.